Nice to see everybody, and welcome to this book launch, and a warm welcome to you from Hong Kong. We're getting towards the end of a particularly sweltering Hong Kong afternoon. So if I say good afternoon to you, it's because that's where we're based. But if it's good morning to you or whatever, please take that as the greeting. Very nice to see you all. Delighted to see so many people joining us on Zoom, and we also have a fair number of people in person, which is great. My name is Mark Shuttleworth, and it is a great pleasure for me to, and indeed a great honour for me to introduce the book. Actually, it's not launched yet, so technically this is a pre-launch, but it's coming out imminently. The book by my esteemed colleague, Dr. Robert Neather. The title, as I'm sure you all know, is Translating for Museums, Galleries and Heritage Sites, and it is a distillation of Robert's considerable expertise that he's been building up over quite a number of years, during which he's been researching this topic. And of course, he's one of the, if not the best known name in this particular field. So this really is a special publication and a very welcome addition to the increasing body of knowledge that is being built up about translation in different contexts. This one I think plugs a gap that has been needing to be plugged for quite some time. So Robert, I'm sure you all know Robert or know of Robert. He's been based at Baptist University since 2008. 2009, 2000, I've forgotten, but one or the other, anyway.
2008, I think.
Quite a long time. And of course, he spent quite a number of years as the department head. He is of course a sinologist and an expert in Tang dynasty poetry. But no, it's still with you, I have no doubt. And since being at Baptist, he has specialized in a number of research areas. But I think increasingly this topic has become the one that he's made his own in a very special way. So we're very much looking forward to everything he's going to share with us. And of course, he's not alone on the platform, because we are greatly honoured also to welcome three distinguished visitors who are going to be in discussion with Robert. And these are Dr. SHARON DEANE-COX, Dr. LIAO MIN-HSIU, and MEIFANG. If I could say a few words of introduction for each of our speakers in turn. So Dr. or SHARON, if I may call you SHARON, is based in the University of STRATHCLYDE in Scotland, in Glasgow. She's a senior lecturer in translation studies and also the director of knowledge exchange. Now, something that's becoming increasingly important for researchers, as we're all aware, within the Department of Humanities at the University of Strathclyde. Her current interdisciplinary research focus is on how translation mediates memory on textual, interpersonal, intersemiotic, and ethical levels. She's published a monograph on literary retranslation, as well as numerous journal articles and chapters on the role of translation in reference to transmission of Holocaust testimonies and trauma, and in the context of museums and heritage bodies. She recently co-edited the Routledge Handbook of Translation and Memory and is associate editor of the journal Translation Studies. Then LIAO MIN-HSIU from HERIOT-WATT University in Edinburgh. MIN-HSIU is is an associate professor in the Department of Languages and Intercultural Studies. Her research focuses on multimodal translation in museums, heritage sites, and urban landscapes. She's particularly interested in the interaction between verbal and visual semiotics and the dynamics between text producers and receivers. She is a member of the IARTIST Training Committee. And then last but not least, MEIFANG is joining us from the International Department of the National Museum of China. And personally, I might say, MEIFANG, it's a great pleasure to meet you, if only online. We haven't actually had the pleasure of meeting before. So MEIFANG graduated from the Beijing Foreign Studies University with an MA degree in English language and literature. She's been working with the National Museum of China since 2009, mainly responsible for translation, international collaborative programs, and foreign language publication. She presided over many translation projects of the museum's permanent and temporary exhibitions on Chinese culture, history, and art, and often took part as a translator. She also participated in the planning of several international exhibitions held at the museum and abroad. So there we are. Those are our speakers. And I think, Robert, you're going to kick off in a minute with a PowerPoint presentation presenting the contents of the book. And after that, there's going to be, I think we're going to ask each of our speakers if they could speak on a topic related to their interests and the intersection between their interests and the book that's coming out, or whatever you prepared, obviously is warmly welcome. And then a round of questions and answers leading. We'll see how things go, but hopefully that will lead to a more free interchange. And then there will be a chance for members of the audience also to jump in with questions if anyone would like to. So that's more than enough from me. Let me hand over to Robert. Thank you very much, everybody.
Right. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. I'll try to sort of stare into the camera as much as possible to get the eye contact. Thank you very much, Mark, for that really glowing introduction. It's really honoured to be asked to give this talk as part of our departmental book talk series, and also really delighted to see such a large audience. I have to remember that there are also people in the room, so I've got to sort of move my eyes back and forth, and really appreciate your interest and your support here today. I'd like to thank, obviously, the admin team who are here and busily sorted out the technical glitches. And I would particularly like to reiterate Mark's thanks to our three guest speakers here today, Sharon, Michelle, and MEIFANG. It is really great to have you with me and with us here. All three of you are cited in my book, which you realize you haven't seen yet, but anyway, you're all in there. And all of you have really been an inspiration to my own work. So I'm absolutely delighted that you can be here with us. All right, so let me start off then with a bit of an introduction to this book. I can get it to work. There we go. Sharing. I need to share. Thanks for the reminder. Right. Right. Good, right. So translating for museums, galleries, and heritage sites. It may be quite a long title, and I put it in as my proposed title and then stuck with it. But most of the time, I'm really talking in this book in a kind of shorthand by using the term museums. And I think museums, galleries, and heritage sites do all overlap quite a lot in terms of the issues involved in translation. And so I put them all in the title here to sort of signify the broader application that this book has. And in fact, if you think there's a lot of overlap between these three categories, often a gallery is a kind of art museum, and likewise a heritage site might also be considered a museum. So in fact, the cover, when I was asked to choose a cover picture for this book, I chose, as you can see, the Forbidden City in Beijing. And that's a perfect example because we may tend to think of that as a heritage site and as an architectural wonder that you can walk around. But of course, it is also a museum, and it's known as the Palace Museum. So that's quite a nice sort of example of how museums and heritage sites overlap very substantially. Okay, well, it is published in the Routledge Translation Practices Explained series, and I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with that. This is a very practically oriented series and suitable for teaching and learning. So it will include things like, discussion points, various different types of exercise, and I'll give a couple later as just a quick example. But, this is sometimes we get criticized for writing, quote unquote, just a textbook. So I would like to say, actually, there's a hell of a lot of research behind this as well. So this is very much research informed. And as Mark kindly mentioned just now, it's particularly drawing on various of my previous research works in this field, but also works such as those produced by our speakers today, who are really at the cutting edge of research. And what it takes then is these various insights and tries to apply them to this more kind of practice-related, practical and teaching and learning context. And Mark just now talked about filling a gap. That's right. So, there has been an increasing awareness of museum translation in both the museum and the translation studies communities. And I thought this was quite an interesting one. I think I've mentioned it in my book somewhere. Beverly Sorrell, who is a very well-known writer of a book called Exhibit Labels, an Interpretive Approach. Well, her 1997 edition has 3 pages on translation and multilingualism. 1 page is actually a picture, so you've really got 2 pages of text. But when we jump to 2015, we find 11 pages on translation and multilingualism. Now, it's a very small example, but I think that illustrates there's this gradual development of awareness of translation in the museum studies community. And also, of course, in the translation studies community, there has been a big, surge. I don't know whether that's overestimating it, and maybe our speakers can talk more about that. But certainly there has been a kind of increase in the amount of work that is being done in museum translation, and a lot of very exciting stuff being published. There's a whole edition of Babel, the journal, coming out on museum translation in October. Some of the issues from that are already available online. So a lot of research going on, but very little of this research-informed practical training has been offered so far, certainly in English anyway. And so I've said, hopefully this book can set off a trend. That may be a little bit of an exaggeration, but I hope that I can stimulate more work in this area and more of this practice-related training work. All right, so just one or two general things on museum translation, and I know that Michelle particularly and others are going to pick up on various points of this. But current research in museum translation has tended to move things from a linguistic to more metaphorical usages. We have, for example, museums as translations. So that was first formulated, I think, by Kate Sturge in 2007. And that's the idea of museums as forms of cultural translation, that you have an exhibition which somehow translates culture. The second one, which I've written a little bit on, but which I think is still under-theorized perhaps, is this idea of the museum as a translation zone, a sort of zone of intercultural interaction of many different people from different cultures and different languages. As an extreme example of visitor interaction, I put this picture up, which I've also included in my book, and you may have seen it in some of my presentations before, but I just think it's incredible. This is a number of visitors, a vast number, before the Mona Lisa in the Louvre Museum. And the visitor experience really becomes something completely different. It's whether you can hold your selfie stick high enough to actually take a picture. You've also got the idea of visitor experiences translation. Tried to write a little bit on that lately as well. Again, under-theorized so far, which is really looking at how visitors decode exhibitions as a kind of form of translation. And the other one I put down here, you might even find the idea of the visitor as a translated person. So you go into the museum, you find this sort of transformation taking place after you have come into contact with these other cultures that are represented. And so that's like the sort of the translated self. Well, so all of these are very interesting and they're very sort of metaphorical. I don't talk a lot about them in this book. I think it's worth being made aware of them. What I'm talking about, so I tend to talk about those in the final chapter and occasionally elsewhere, but what I'm mainly concerned with in this book, being very much at practice level, is that level of so-called translations in the museum. And many of you will know, again, Kate Sturge makes that distinction between museums as translations and translations in the museum. So with translations in the museum, we're obviously talking first and foremost about interlingual translation between a wide variety of languages. We've also, though, got to remember intersemiotic translation as being a crucial factor in this translation environment, with a sense particularly of how pictures and objects interact with the texts. Just to give an example, what you have here is a very large display from a museum of fisheries in Reykjavik in Iceland. Well, you've got this very large flag there, which may look like something Buddhist or it may look like something else, but it's actually the hammer of Thor, right? The Nordic god. So this is one of these symbols that has so many different meanings. Now, if you look at this, this is the actual flag that was used on the ship. This is a model of a ship. Right down here, I'm just pointing with a cursor, you can see this Geneva down at the bottom. Well, now here's the text that explains this flag right down at the bottom. So if you look at the main one, you can see Geneva there, and then you have to really, this is a close-up, and we just see this tiny weeny text down at the bottom there. Nevertheless, still very important, but you've got to sort of look quite hard here. So this is where you get the visual as the crucial thing, and then okay, here the visitor really has to sort of look for the text to find out a little bit more of what it's all about. One or two interesting translation problems come up on this. I'm not an Icelandic specialist, but I have sort of included it in the book as a little bit of something different. So that's an example of a very kind of rich into semiotic environment where the visuals are probably dictating principally the first reaction of the visitor, and then they will look at the texts. The other thing to mention is intralingual translation. So that's how texts in the same language interact. And as you will know, you get a lot of different source texts and a lot of different target texts, all within the museum space. And that's one of the things I think that is interesting about museum translation, because you're never just dealing with a source and a target text. You're always dealing with a system of these texts that have to work together. And that's something I think for practical purposes, although it's quite difficult to model it in a book like this, is certainly something that you need to be aware of. So I'm focusing on interpretive and informational texts. I'm not doing things like press releases or administrative documents or research papers, although all of those could also come under museum translation. There have been books that have studied those as well. So I'm looking at the system of texts for interpretation, kind of ecology, as it's called in the museum. So with that, and this is the way then that I've structured it for the book, around that kind of text hierarchy, if you like. So we have the introduction, obviously. Chapter 7, translating cultures. So that's something that looks a little bit more at the cultural level of translation. Some of those ideas like the translation zone that I talked about earlier, and putting museum translation center stage, I've called it. So actually sort of really kind of making it central to practice. Within those two bookends, chapter 1 and chapter 7, you've got chapter 2, which is a kind of conceptual overview that follows kind of keywords through, like, texts, translation purpose, museum purpose, visitors, curators, so on and so forth. And this was something that I was suggested to do by one of the anonymous reviewers at the beginning, and I think that it's probably works quite well like that. Chapter 3 is a short one on professional and practitioner perspectives. 1 or 2 things about the translation brief, 1 or 2 questions about quality control, quality assurance, and so on and so forth. And visitor reaction as well. And then the main ones that are much longer are chapters 4, 5, and 6. And that's where I take, texts of different layers of this museum system. So the first one is objects, wall panels, so fixed texts in the exhibition space. Chapter 5 is what I've called optional materials, so things for sort of added learning. So we're moving away from that fixed space onto something like leaflets, worksheets, educational worksheets, and also I put a little
practitioner and professional perspectives.
And then finally, chapter 6, you've got translating texts beyond the museum, looking at museum catalogs, guides and web pages. Now, there's quite a lot of issues in these that sort of overlap. So there's quite a lot of cohesion between the chapters, quite a lot of synergy. So many of those things like spatial considerations or various different aspects of cultural problems, code preference, a lot of these things come up again across these texts. So hopefully by the end of the book, you have sort of got through to a kind of very, very holistic understanding of these different texts and the problems that they raise. It's also multilingual, and so in a kind of non-language specific way. That was a little bit of a challenge to me to start with, because I'm used to teaching Chinese into English translation, and I was told this, you've got to have lots of languages in this. Hence the Icelandic example and various of these others. And it has to be non-language specific. So what I've done is provided a reference translation for each non-English language. You can see here, well, this is something that I found in Macau various years ago. It's a wooden mock-up of an ancient Chinese saw. Well, this must be one of the obscurest copyrights that I had to go for. Eventually, I managed to track it down with the very kind help of Esther Kwok, who also really wanted knowledge, has helped me tremendously. It's from I think it's the Carpentry Woodworking Union of Macau. And as part of the copyright, I also had to put the full address down there as well. But they were very, very supportive. And of course, delighted to give our copyright to you. So thank you very much to them for this picture. So what you've got is a Chinese, Portuguese, and English. And so I've put a reference translation for those who don't understand Chinese, and then another English reference translation for those who don't know Portuguese, and then we have the actual translation in English. So what it means is that you can compare the English with these other languages, even if you don't know the languages. You get a sort of English reference and literal translation of what each of them says. I'm probably going over, Mark.
It's fine.
It's fine. Okay, good. That's well like a very sort of laid-back chair. So, areas not covered. Well, this is something we could talk about later. Perhaps I can ask speakers who may want to say something about this, and that's AI and translation technology. I am not anywhere near an expert. I'm more of a beginner in that area, and so I wouldn't personally feel able to write a book on that. And indeed, it really would, I think, require another book to do museum technology translation training. But I'd be interested to hear people's thoughts on it. And the other thing I really don't cover at all in this is audio description or other modes for accessibility, like subtitling for deaf and hard of hearing, for video, that kind of thing I don't do. And there's a lot of research now coming out on museum audio description. So again, I think time is absolutely ripe for a further guide in that area. Just a couple of slides to move towards the end. On the pedagogical side of this, what I'm trying to do is encourage as much practice and reflection on the various contextual, linguistic, and intersemiotic issues involved. So I use a whole variety of different things: writing exercises, translation exercise, editing, reflective tasks, and so on. There's also a role play exercise. I think it's in chapter 3, where you have to sort of convince the museum director of your quality assurance procedures, something like that. So that was suggested to me to put in a role play. So, okay, you can find out more, have fun with that. I try to also link it to real life situations and use authentic text samples and pictures. I put this picture here. If you're wondering why it's there, it is from a kind of an analysis exercise. And I just thought it looked nice as well, so I put it there, but it is actually in the book as part of an exercise. So you can use these in a kind of as-is way, just as they are, but you can develop it if you're teaching this, or indeed if you're self-learning, you can change these things or use them as an inspiration, very much depending on your own language combination or your own textual needs. Just to give two brief examples of things that I've included in there. This picture, well, comes in a class, I'd say. Anybody know who this picture's by? Anyway, Gauguin, right? And very famous. I had to pay for the copyright. That was a pain. All these pictures I had to pay for myself. So feeling a bit out of pocket by the end of this book. So please go out and buy one, help me. Right, and so this is an example of a writing exercise and trying to encourage people to think about the intersemiotic links and what sort of visual perception does. So it's not translation, but I think it's something that is important. So I've asked them to write a description of this painting using 100 words. What aspects have you included? If you've mentioned this big dog, and you'll have to consult the book to know why this is important, then how much salience have you given it? What sort of importance do you give to this dog when you're writing? And then, well, can you find different descriptions of the painting? How do they differ? How is the dog handled? Again, I can tell you more about the dog if you like later. And what aspects again are given salience, and what aspects do you downplay? So it's in a way it's an exercise in intersemiotic translation. It's an exercise in looking at the picture and saying, well, what do you get out from it? And different people will see different things and give different significances. That can have important implications for translation. The other one, which is very long, is a French example from the Musée d'Aquitaine in Bordeaux. And I used this as an example to think about, again, factors driving translation decisions, things like translator agency and rewriting. So this was more of a translation exercise. As you can see, you've got a very large French text there. So we can say that French is definitely the preferred code. And you've got a much smaller English and Spanish version there. So again, the exercise was around trying to think about why that is and what you could change and so forth. So I asked how have the English and Spanish translators abridged this, because this is very clearly an abridgment, to meet the constraints of the code preference. Does it provide sufficient information for Spanish English visitors, or would you feel left out? Do you think a better approach of rewriting might be used? And then trying to actually get people to do a translation. So you can either translate it from French, or you can translate it from a kind of literal English translation, and sort of see what works when you do it. Do you do it as an abridgment, or do you do it as a more radical rewriting? You can compare with the original. And then the final exercise in this particular little exercise, the final task, if you were given control of the spatial layout, would you keep it as it is? Now, I would guess probably most translators do not have that kind of agency to control the layout, but it would be fascinating if you could control the layout. Would you change it? Would you perhaps allow more space for the translations, or would you still keep them at the bottom like that? So that's another example of an exercise, and these are things over the years that I've tried to bring into my teaching, and it's really fascinating to see what students do with them, so I hope that that will be of interest. So that's just a couple of samples to illustrate the kind of thing. Thank you very much. Now, this is the Save 20% page, which I was bombarded by the publisher with this kind of information. So I thought, well, I better use one. Anyway, I put it up there for you. SMART 2022, till the end of the month. That's all, I think, from me. Thank you very much.
Very much. Yeah, thank you very much indeed. A really fascinating introduction to the really rich contents of the book. We do hope it comes out before the next month, the end of next month, so that we can make use of the code. I'm sure it will.
I think it probably will. Yeah. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, it's targeted. Have you got a release date actually? Or?
I think it is probably could be 1st of July. That's what they've said. It seems to be moved a little bit. It seems to be it's moved a couple of times. I think 1st of July is the final one. So I think we're looking at next week. I'm just going to keeping my fingers crossed. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, time has come to invite our speakers to come in with their contributions, and I guess that you possibly have an idea of what they're going to say.
Right. Yeah.
I do not. So I'm very much particularly looking forward to what you all have to say. So perhaps I will invite each of you to speak in turn, and shall we start with you, Sharon?
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, so I'd just like to start off by saying what an
tiny bit quiet. So sorry to break it. Can everyone hear? Can you hear okay? Or a little louder?
Is that any better?
It's getting that way. You say something again, please.
Shall I just keep talking and hopefully?
I think everyone here can hear you okay, and Michelle is nodding as well, so that's a good sign. Meifang, can you hear Sharon okay? Fantastic. Okay, I think we're good. Thank you. And Mario is also confirming it's fine online. Okay, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I was just saying what an absolute pleasure it is to be here today to sort of celebrate Robert's book. So yeah, I think this is very much the book that we've all been waiting for, and I'm definitely very excited to get my hands on a copy. Yeah, so Robert had actually, he'd very kindly invited me to say a few words about a research network that I set up a few years ago called Translating Scotland's Heritage. So just to give you a bit of background context, this is something that grew out of sort of a very long-standing fascination with museum and heritage translation. And that in turn was very much an extension of my interest in how translation and memory are entangled in sort of really very complex ways. And yeah, I think it's that complexity that I find so intriguing in museum translation, where there's so many different moving parts, and sort of Robert's already spoke compellingly about that. So you've got translation operating on different levels. You've got meaning making happening across different sign systems in sort of the name of different agendas within different constraints. And then you've got so many different people involved, including kind of curators, interpretation teams, and of course, translators. And I think the choices that they make can all have such a significant impact on how visitors then engage with and understand and possibly even act on the past. But I think it's also often the case that it's difficult to get a big picture of sort of how that assemblage works, because we quite often lack insights from the very people who are at the heart of that decision-making process. And I think that's very much the gap that sort of spurred me on to set up Translating Scotland's Heritage Research Network. And I was really very fortunate to have Historic Environment Scotland, or sort of HES, on board as co-investigators. And I was also fortunate to receive funding from the Royal Society of Edinburgh to sort of facilitate all of that. And essentially what that allowed us to do was to get museum and heritage professionals together in a room with professional heritage translators and translation studies researchers, including Michelle, and just to get conversations going around sort of what the perceived obstacles and stumbling blocks around commissioning and doing heritage translations were. But it was also an opportunity to identify maybe what was working well and thinking through potential solutions to boost existing practices. So just, yeah, very quickly, I'd like to share a few kind of examples of what came out of those discussions. So first, yeah, quite interesting, what transpired was that the HES and sort of other heritage professionals had actually never heard of CAT tools before. So that kind of gave us the opportunity to provide a demo of how they could be used in a heritage context. And we were able to go on to have sort of an open and sort of very honest conversation about the pros and cons of using those tools. And one idea that came out of those discussions was the possibility of creating a multilingual term base that's sort of specific to Scottish heritage and tourism, that could be used by sort of freelancers or agencies or sort of in-house translators to sort of help enhance accuracy and consistency and so on. So that's I think that's one of those cases where it's watch this space. I haven't had the time or the resources to take that any further yet, but I think it would definitely be sort of a very valuable resource to generate and explore where that takes us. And then another very illuminating discussion that took place centred on concerns that Historic Environment Scotland had around translation quality, because sort of they weren't sure what they were sending out was what they were getting back. But so the dynamic was really interesting, because it was precisely because they were expressing those concerns in a room with heritage translators that those translators were sort of in turn, in response, able to offer a really good degree of reassurance about their domain specific expertise and know-how. And I think it was very much the case that the translators, they were able to sort of alleviate, they were able to sort of offset a lot of those concerns by making it clear just how skilled and experienced they actually were. And then at the same time, the translators had the opportunity to stress the point that the more information they had about the Heritage Translation Project at the outset, the better. And that particular discussion then led an HES colleague to draft a translation brief template that we all sort of tweaked together during a subsequent workshop. And that template is now being used by HES when they're commissioning translation work. And I'm also using it in sort of my master's teaching as well. So again, that's proved to be quite a valuable output, sort of in pedagogical terms as well. I'm conscious of the time, but I just want to just quickly say that the translators did actually feel that there was a lack of specialized training available, and that was particularly the case for translators who were working with Scotland's minority languages, so Gaelic and Scots. So one thing that I'm hoping to do is to be able to create more CPD opportunities in the future. And I think, Robert, your book is going to play a very, very sort of valuable role integrating that as well. So again, that's another reason why I'm so excited to sort of see it come out. And then possibly one of the biggest issues that came out of those discussions that I don't think were anywhere sort of near to resolving was just the sheer range of different visitor expectations and sort of behavioural idiosyncrasies when it came to sort of using and responding to translated material. And we sort of had huge discussions over how, or even if we should try and kind of accommodate all of those sort of what I term sort of individual differences. So there's still a big question mark over that. And I think kind of one way of tackling that issue is to try to collect just as much empirical evidence as possible. And so, Robert, I know we've kind of looked at the past and using sort of things like visitor sort of diaries, kind of that all that data, sort of all those methodological tools are going to play sort of another crucial role. And I think just all to say that I think one of the keys to driving forwards knowledge and practice in this area is being able to work collaboratively. There's inherent value in bringing people together who have different stakes in that sort of museum or heritage translation space, and just having those dialogues that allow for joined up thinking, for sharing best practices, for sort of building capacity or whatever it is. So I mean, you could call this a participatory approach, you could call it knowledge exchange, but I think even if you sort of strip away all of those buzzwords, there's something really fundamentally important about working together rather in siloed ways. And so from what you've been saying, Robert, that sort of bringing together the practice and the research really picks up that mantle. So again, I'm absolutely thrilled to see this book come out, and I think it's gonna make a really valuable contribution to sort of how we think about and how we practice, and as well how we advance, how we improve museum translation. So yeah, that's it from me.
Thank you very much, Sharon, and so many interesting points there. Maybe we can come back and pick up on some of those after the other two speakers, but I think particularly, well, loads of things there, but particularly what you're saying on visitor expectations, and that's a whole sort of thing that seems to me vast amounts of work still need to be done in that area to try to actually understand how visitors are using these translations. So a great point. There is other things I want to pick up on, but maybe I can ask, or shall I? Mark, do you want me to hand back to you as the official chair?
Since you're holding the mic, why don't you invite?
I'm sorry, I've taken over the proceedings temporarily. I'm just getting too excited, I think. Okay, I'll come back to Sharon in a minute, and I think I would say if any of the other speakers just want to jump in on the end of some of these, or when you're talking, if you want to respond to any of these points that are made, that would be great. Okay, Michelle, I wondered if you could say something more generally about the whole overview, giving us an overview of museum translation research, where it is at the moment, and what the imperatives for future research are, and probably you can speak to some of what Sharon has said as well if you want. Yeah, so can I invite you to say a few words? Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert, for your invitation. Can you hear my voice okay?
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I was truly honored to have this opportunity to join this pre-launch event of this very much awaited book. I think, to the best of my knowledge, up to now, there has not been a monograph dedicated to interlingual translation practice in museum translation. So when I learned that Robert has written a book, I was really excited. And I was also quite curious about what directions he would take, because although there are not that many studies on museum translation, I mean, compared with other perhaps more dominant trends in the field, I feel the existing research has actually varied quite significantly in the approaches they take and the directions they are interested in. So, I mean, Robert's work into textuality, into modality, professional practices, and more recently on visitors' interpretations, and also Sharon's work on memory and translation. So this has all received much attention. But more recently, as Robert pointed out, we have seen an emerging trend in museum audio descriptions. So I have read quite a few articles on that. And in addition, I think I've also seen some recent publications focusing on redefining, reconceptualizing museum translation as a museum as translation, so as a cultural representation, and they examine how museum translate cultures through curatorial practices. And this kind of study may or may not include interlingual translation, or may not include discussions of languages at all. So in my own observation, and again, this can be pretty much biased by my own passion for interlingual translation. So Robert and Sharon, you may not agree with this, but I kind of feel like interlingual translation hasn't seen proportional growth alongside this recent expansion of interest on museum translation. And in fact, I think it might be the opposite, with increasing focus on museum as cultural representation. Interlingual translation, again, to me, seems run the risk of being sidelined or neglected in many discussions. So it's in this trend, I'm really delighted to see Robert's book bring text and interlingual translation to the forefront again, and looking at, I've read the preview, and looking at the table of the content, I can see it's very thorough and comprehensive discussion of texts of different genres. And also, I think it's even more valuable, I mean, as has always been with your work, is that these discussions, it's not only that we want the interlingual translation, but we want this discussion to be firmly grounded in a professional context. So it's not we're just discussing a pure linguistic exercise in a vacuum. So responding to your question about what is imperative for future research, I think both you and Sharon has just mentioned that. I think collaboration with museum professionals is really the way forward. Yeah. And again, to go back to my own bias view, I think the way forward to strengthen this collaboration, and I think that the effective way we as translation researchers can contribute to this kind of collaboration meaningfully is through our expertise in all forms of translation between languages, rather than through expanding the concept of museum translation to the point that it just becomes a sub-discipline of museum studies. You may not agree with that, but it's just my view. I just want to share with you again my recent experiences of encounters with museum professionals. So 2 weeks ago, I was in Ljubljana, in case you don't know, it's the capital of Slovenia. And I was surprisingly invited by a few science museum professionals who are really keen to learn more about multilingual practices in museums. So we jointly led a panel called "Now You Are Speaking My Languages." So I thought maybe science languages are more universal, but actually they are really interested in discussing about how to translate science across cultures as well. So one of the questions many people ask is, how do they offer guidelines to either in-house translators or external translation service providers, or even more so, not sure if it's correct practices or not, but many of them ask about how do they train their bilingual or multilingual members of staff to translate. So to this question, again, I think Robert's book can provide valuable insights to that. So I think that's what I'm going to say, and I look forward to reading the book and incorporating some of your suggested exercise in my classroom teaching. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I hope it lives up to expectations. Anyway, you will find yourself referenced in there as well. So you know that's you're part of it. So thank you very much, and a lot of interesting things to talk about there, and particularly the mention that you made of the guidelines as well, and actually sort of trying to whether there are guidelines given to external translators and so forth. Science is also something that I think less has been said about in certainly in museum translation area. I mean, again, in my book, I'm also guilty of keeping off science because I've tended to look more at sort of cultural stuff. But you're absolutely right that yeah, the translation of science across cultures, is something that raises a lot of issues as well. So, hoping that you're going to be working in that area as we go forward, and look forward to seeing more work. Okay, let's come back again, and then let me invite MEIFANG to say a few words. And MEIFANG, I think you have a sort of very kind of unique perspective here, because you're translator embedded in the museum, and National Museum of China, obviously one of the world's top museums. So, I mean, it would be interesting to hear, I think, something about the kinds of projects that you've been involved in, and perhaps taking up some of these issues that have been talked about, like, collaboration with other staff, or collaboration with curators, and anything you'd like to touch on. Okay, thanks a lot. You're muted at the moment again, but can you unmute? I can't. Yeah.
Can you hear us? Can you hear
Yes.
me? Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
I'm MEIFANG from the National Museum of China, and thank you for inviting me to this pre-launch event. And firstly, congratulations, Robert, for your new book. And so I will talk about my own experience in museum translation. I started my career as a museum translator 15 years ago after I graduated from university, and for the most part of my work, I was struggling with the linguistic and the cultural challenges of museum translation, especially for the exhibition translation from Chinese to English. And so I translated a lot of permanent exhibitions of the museum, mainly on Chinese history and on the Chinese material cultures like bronzes, calligraphy and painting, coins, jade, ceramics, and so on. And I did the job through the on-the-job learning, and also through my close collaboration with the curators. And the curators they were my teachers. They told me a lot of knowledge on the Chinese history, and they answered a lot of my questions about the exhibition, about the objects, and about the history, Chinese history and culture. And also I did the job through self-learning. I did extensive reading on the Chinese history after I came to the museum. And I think that's very important for a museum translator. And about 4 years ago, I was faced with a new challenge, which was greater than the linguistic and the cultural challenge, because my museum decided that most of the exhibitions have to have bilingual Chinese and English exhibition labels. So there was sudden a burst of translation projects. So I can no longer do the translation in the self-sufficient way. That means I have to organize the translation projects, to organize different people like translators, revisers, and the expert reviewers, and also the curators to do the translation. And actually, I did this through trials and errors, because the main problem is we lack the competent translators, whether it is museum staffs or external translation companies. And so during the past years, actually there were a lot of problematic translations in the museum. And I think for me, it's very difficult to find a competent museum translator who can who know the exhibition, who know the objects, and who also can interpret these things in a foreign language, in the non-native language. It's very difficult for me. And when I began my research 2 years ago, and I had a lot of discussions with colleagues in other Chinese museums, and also from museums in other countries. Actually, I find that many of them face the same challenge like me, and so that challenge points to the lack of training of museum translators. So I think Robert's book is very timely, and for the translators, this book will provide useful guidelines and drawing upon the concepts from not only translation studies, but also from museum studies. And also for the museums, this book reminds them of the importance of translation and also the importance of training their translators if they still want to address the cultural diversity of their visitors. And also, I'd like to say that I really appreciate that Roberts has combined practice with theory. In the museum sector, many museum studies scholars are warning us against a divide between practice and theory. And I think Robert has made this, he combined the two. And I remember in one of his papers, he mentions by quoting from other scholars that when we are doing the museum translation research, we should combine the practice with theory, and we should be opposed to a critic by standing from outside the museum, and rather we should go into the museum and to know what is happening inside the museum. And Robert did this, and for me, Robert, his book and his researches give me the opportunity to go outside the museum to a larger world, from the translation studies world, and also to other museums in the world. Yes, and I think I very much look forward to read this book, and I will recommend this book to my museum colleagues, and also to the museum translators I know, the external translators. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, MEIFANG. That's very, very generous. I hope that will see an increase in my sales. There's quite a small print run, so maybe they will have to print another copy. That would be really nice. Well, thank you very much. I'm aware that the admin staff also should be off work. Don't worry about you. I do worry about you. Anyway, all right. We don't have any more immediate questions, so I'm going to hand back to the chair. Let me just, before he does, let me just say thank you very much to everybody, and particularly to MEIFANG, Sharon, and Michelle, for a great discussion. I think we've gone a lot longer, and I feel after this we should sort of get together again and do one of these again, because it is just so lovely to meet everybody online and to have the chance to talk. So thank you very much. I'll hand back to Mark, who's patiently been here to do the official honours. Thank you, Mark.
enjoy it all. No, I wasn't going to say that. I haven't been relaxing. Yeah, I mean, just I know I need to be brief, so I think I will restrict what I have to say to very largely just to a big thank you to Robert, obviously, and big congratulations. I mean, it's been an eye-opener. It's been a real eye-opener for me, and I dare say for many people here, right, the scope and the breadth of this topic. And I think with the publication of your book, it is going to come of age. It's going to take its place, its rightful place within the discipline as a very significant topic, which touches on so many issues that are of interest to the discipline as a whole. Intertextuality, interstitiality translation, multimodality, and the physicality of the museum space. So many different topics, and I wish the book all the best, and I'm sure it will be well received, and people will devour its contents and make great use of it. I'm getting into the translation as or reading as cannibalism now.
Thank you very much.
But no, thank you, and a big thank you, of course, to Michelle, to MEIFANG, and to Sharon. Thank you so much for your contribution, for enriching the proceedings with your presence and your words. Thank you to all our participants, and thank you for all questions. And of course, a very big thank you to Rachel and to Sheldon, who have taken such excellent care of the technical side of the proceedings. We certainly couldn't have managed without you. So on that note, once again, thank you to everybody, and have a good evening or rest of day or whatever may apply in your particular geographical setting. All the best. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, everyone. Bye.
Oh,
Sorry, what? Okay.
they want to.
QR code for the evaluation code.
Oh, they want an evaluation. Okay.
Oh, right. Sorry, the evaluation code. Right. Yes.
There we are. Speaking of QR codes,
Thank you.
it's,
You're not going to escape without one QR code.
that's the evaluation survey.
Thanks for joining us today. Please scan the QR code because your comment is valuable. And besides that, our next book talk will be held on September, and the information will send to everyone who signed up for emails, and we look forward to see you again.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sheldon.
Thank you. Great. Thank you very much. Free to go when you've done this.
Not before you scan the code.
That's right.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.